And also NaviRetail. I am Paige Bronk. I represent the town of Groton, Economic and Community Development. All of our staff have been pretty active in trying to gear up for this evening, and I thank you for showing up. We are going to receive a presentation tonight from a consultant that Groton uses, NaviRetail, Casey Kidd. I'll turn that over in a couple minutes, but I just want to give you a little bit of background. So obviously we promote Groton as a community and as an economy, and we are blessed to have the number of jobs that we have in Groton, but we also have some challenges. People have discussed about some of the successes we've had over time, Miracle Mile, and why can't we get certain businesses in town like we used to have? How do we match this? But also we've talked a lot about housing as well. So although we're here to talk about retail tonight, Casey's here to really broaden the conversation a little bit more. It's about economic development. So it's about supply and demand. It's about trying to convert some of the people that work here every day into residents to help feed our economy. It's an important cycle. And that's always something that we focus on. So it's not as simple as saying, you know, I would like this company coming to town. We need to understand what it takes to bring that company to town, how to get the investment back into Groton. There are certain metrics, there's certain formulas that come into play in getting the types of offerings that we desire locally. So we do focus on that. We have been focusing on that. We've been working with NaviRetail for a couple years. We were all challenged during the pandemic. NaviRetail worked with us closely in doing a lot of business surveys, try to find out what our challenges are, what our opportunities were during the pandemic. Now that we're, for the most part, moving past that point in time, we're really wanting to get back to nuts and bolts and trying to find out what does it take to attract what we desire here locally. We have used Greater Groton recently to get more input on a number of initiatives, one of which is retail and other redevelopment desires. Some of you had participated in a quick poll. Some of the information we're getting is consistent over time. People want this type of business, they want that type of business, and I'm not referencing individual company names for a reason, but I think over the past few years, people consistently have mentioned what they are seeking. We match that with our efforts to attract the right types of businesses within town, and we work with NaviRetail to do so. I'll also mention that over the next couple days, Sam Eisenbizer and I will be up in Boston for a retail conference. We used to do this pre-pandemic. NaviRetail travels the country to all of the conferences in trying to attract the right investment on our behalf as well. I think I'll stop talking at this point in time, but I just want you to know that we work closely with the desires of the people in Groton in trying to carry that forward and bring investment to the town, and we work with experts such as Casey, and I think you'll find much of what he has to say tonight quite fascinating.
Thank you so much, Paige, and thank you all for having me tonight. Just to kind of echo what Paige was saying, one thing I think is really interesting about economic development is that, in my opinion, there's no one part that's more important than the others. They all kind of just play into each other. And so while we specialize in retail recruitment, market research, there's no part of economic development that I don't think a town shouldn't be doing. I think that they're all equally important. As a result, we're here to help with the retail portion of that. But I think there's a lot of other things that this staff is doing right now that are also going to help move the town forward in a lot of manners and varieties. To give you a little background on me, I'm originally from Mississippi, a small town right outside of Tupelo, Mississippi, currently living in Texas. And I've spent a lot of time in New England, and I love it up here. And it's really interesting for us to be able to go all the different places that we do to see what other cities and towns are doing. And so we take that with us everywhere that we go. I've personally worked in 400 cities in 30 states. And so we've seen a little bit of everything all over the country, and that really gives us a lot of insight as to maybe some things that might not have been thought about in the areas that we're working because of regional issues or whatever that they're used to seeing. They might not know that, well, California's doing this or Washington State can do that, and we can bring some of that insight with us when we come here. One of the first things that we look at when we enter a market is where the consumers are coming from. And we ask the towns that everywhere that we go, and we get varied responses, but we have to be able to verify that for the retailers. It's not enough to just say, well, Paige told me they're coming from here, or John said they're coming from there. What we find is that most of them are not even living within the town limits. And so what's really interesting there is that while you might market the town as being 38,000 people, we suspect it's a lot more than that passes through here, works here, and ultimately spends dollars here. So how do we calculate this? Well, the advent of technology about 2014, 2015, we gained the ability to start tracking these. And I'm not going to turn this into a creepy symposium where we're telling you all of our data methods, but at the same time, this is something that we all have. We live in the day and age where everybody has one of these in their pocket, their purse, and it is a really reliable way to see just how far and wide people are coming from to eat and shop and do things in Groton. So when we look at just the raw data, what you see here, each one of these little dots represents a consumer that was here at some point in time and where they live. And so regardless of why they were here or how long they were here or how many times they came back, we know at some point in time each one of these dots were here at a retail establishment. And that's what we care about. We want to ensure that we know, all right, well, how big is this market? Is it bigger than the town limits? And so from that, we filter out the ones that are here once or twice, in a year's time, or the ones that are, not dependable consumers here, the ones that aren't buying groceries here, the ones that, if you were to build a new grocery store, you could depend on a certain amount of people to keep you in business. Not every one of these dots is going to do that. And so what we do is we filter it back down to a primary retail trade area. And what this represents is the area in which consumers are coming from on a reliable basis. And so for Groton, here's what that looks like. And like I said, that's 90 to 95% of buyer propensity. And what that means is how likely someone is to make a purchase here in Groton. So as I said earlier, as of the 2020 census, 38,000 people, we don't want to advertise this to retailers. That's just the amount of people that live within the town limits. What we want to advertise to them is the primary retail trade area. And the reason being is this represents who's shopping here. And that's what's important to them. The town population is irrelevant to them. What they want to know is if we build a store today, if I go and build a brand new grocery store, how many people can I expect to see in the first year? Because that's ultimately going to lead to sales for them, and that's what they care about. So I'll put it back up here again. Pretty standard, what we expected it to be, especially after some of the responses we got back from the town. But this amounts to 72,000 frequent consumers in the market. And that means being here at least once a week. So then from there, we perform what we call a retail gap analysis. And you may have heard of different gap analyses in the past, but for the purposes of retail, we look at what the supply and demand chain looks like. And so for Groton, we found that there's $1.3 billion in demand. That means dollars spent. It doesn't mean necessarily here in Groton. That means the people that are shopping here in Groton spent a total of $1.3 billion on retail goods and services. However, they only spent a fraction of this in the town limits of Groton. That's the portion that we aim to change. The way that we do that is we survey and find that there's $600 million in retail leakage. And by leakage, what we really mean there, it's a bad term, we don't like to use it. It doesn't even sound good. We call this opportunity. And what that opportunity represents is where there is an opportunity to capture dollars if you're a business opening up in Groton. So if we know how much people are spending, every single person in this room, every person that's been in Groton and spent dollars, we know how much they're spending in total, how much they're actually spending in the town limits of Groton. So then when we subtract the two, we get to the part that's left. And this means that people left the town to go get retail goods and services somewhere else. So when we break this down and we look at the individual categories as we can, there's about 200 of them, we can see that some very large numbers Nearly $120 million just in cars that were not purchased here. In groceries, nearly $90 million of grocery opportunity. People bought groceries here. Don't get me wrong. They did buy groceries here. But they didn't buy all the groceries here. And this represents the part that's left after they bought the groceries here and what they really bought in total. For restaurants, $34 million. The average fast food restaurant is going to do about $2 million a year. And so you think about how many more restaurants it takes to equal, at $2 million, $34 million in restaurant opportunity. We found that virtually all in the retail trade area visited a fast food restaurant in the past 6 months. It's not that people don't like to sit down and eat, but if it's popular here, that's what's going to keep coming. That's just how decisions are made. So we look at the psychographics, basically a mixture of demographic information and the consumer trends that we see. It's based on the consumer behavior. So not only who you are in terms of demographics, how much money you make, how old you are, and where you went to school or how long you were in school, but also what does that person like to buy and what did they like to do after work, and whether or not they like to go on trips or cruises or certain types of vacations. We can survey all of that. We get this data from a variety of sources, but this one you'll probably recognize, the consumer reporting agency Experian. Has a really good data set for that, but it's broken down to 67 total segments. And so I've highlighted a couple of things here from these psychographics. Consumers here are more concerned with cost than with quality. It's not that people don't like quality goods, but at the same time, the cost is the first decision factor for them. They're willing to shop around to find the best price. Look in, click coupons or look online, read reviews and see if, well, could I find it somewhere for cheaper. A lot of them have cell phones, and I know this might be shocking because who doesn't have a cell phone at this point, but believe it or not, working in the southern states as we do, there's still a lot of people that have not adopted a smartphone, and that's something we have to factor into our data. But here, it's a lot more prevalent for people to have a smartphone than it would be in some of the southern states that we work. Enjoy things, going out and having fun. Going to the zoo. I know that there's an aquarium in Mystic. It's really interesting to me that this fits the bill because you can go 10 minutes down the road and you find the aquarium. It all makes sense to me now. Very physically active. We saw several people in the middle of the day today out jogging. A lot of boating, hiking, outdoor activities. And so you might ask, well, why is any of this relevant to retail? Because at each point in all of these different psychographics, there is a retail business that serves these consumers. And this is the exact sort of information that they're looking for to find markets that best suit them. So that's kind of a brief overview on the data that we collect and how we collect it. The next part of this is going to be focused on the actual recruitment, retail site selection, and what goes into that. But before we move on, does anyone have questions on the data that we collect or anything regarding the data? Yeah. We're broadcasted, so we got to make sure everybody's on the mic.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Yeah, I mean, there's no Home Depot or Lowe's here. There's a tremendous amount of money that goes there. I question your $2 million on the restaurants because Subway, the average Subway is $400,000.
Right.
But also, what happens is you get a concentration of car dealerships on Broad Street and Coleman Street in New London.
Right.
And there's some on Route 12. And so, I just wonder, how fine-tuned the data you gather is. I mean, I guess you're just taking points from where people are seen. Like when you said that 76,000 people, 72 come to here to buy things, but only 34,000 or some number 32,000 live here.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I'm missing how you can fine tune that. And then there's the question of the retail sites that are available. We have a lot of unused retail, not so much in Mystic, but most of the rest of Groton. So I'm just, curious, how do you tailor, what the demand is, a Lowe's or a Home Depot, and there's one pretty close, and I'm not sure they'd be interested in locating another one this close.
Right. So what we look at, again, all of that data goes back to these 72,000 people that are shopping here on at least a weekly basis. And so we know what they've spent, and then we know what they've spent here. And when there's a difference, it represents that they have left the market. And I can pull up maps to show you for every consumer which direction they went, the path that they took to get there, where they were an hour before. But when it comes down to it, we're looking at what is the total amount of money that's being spent not in Groton, because that represents that they have left the market to go get what they need somewhere else. Which tells me that, all right, well, there's a Home Depot, I guess, in Waterford. So it tells me, well, maybe Lowe's would be a prospect. Well, then we need somewhere for them to, and that was not even one of the sectors that I had, but for restaurants, people left the market and they went and got food that was not in Groton. And so that means that we need to bring restaurants for people to eat at here in Groton. Yes. In terms of dollars, and I can't speak to how the traffic in Mystic is. It was pretty busy today around lunch, but there's $600 million that's being spent outside of Groton. And so our goal, and the town's goal, I believe, is to try and recapture some of that. And we're realistic. We don't expect to capture all of it, but any fraction or percentage of $600 million is a lot of money.
Casey, if I could just jump in, we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So my understanding is if there were questions on the data to date, but I think at the end of this, we're actually targeting about a half hour long to have Q&A and get into more detailed conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to make sure any lingering questions before we move on, because we have one. Yeah.
Sorry. Mystic is actually in the town of Groton. So my question is, well, my side of the bridge, yes. So is that data also including Mystic, or is that just Groton proper, if you will?
We include the Groton half. And so when we look at the town limits, it would be the actual town limits. And so it divides Mystic in half. And so that is including the Groton half of Mystic. Even with that included, you get $600 million.
No. I completely understand. I just want clarification on it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm a little slow with numbers. You're saying $600 million is being spent outside of Groton
By people that shop in Groton, yes.
by
People that shop in Groton.
people who shop in.
They're already here. They've spent dollars here, but they didn't spend all their dollars here.
Oh, okay. I guess I'll have to do. Thank you.
So we have an extremely large amount of out-of-state cars that are in Groton. So people are spending some of their money here, but just for the weekends, and then they're gone for the rest of the time. I would imagine they're probably not buying their cars here,
Right.
perhaps not doing big grocery shops here. They're just here for their weekends and go to wherever they go to.
So we filter those out. We get
You
rid of
did.
those.
Okay.
And so the only ones that you're left with, I'll back up here so that you can see it one more time. Way back here. Is this area here. So these represent the people that will buy groceries here, that will be here at least once a week, that most likely either work at Pfizer or Electric Boat or one of the area manufacturers that might be here. These are the people that if we were to build a grocery store today, these are the people that would be shopping at
Okay,
it.
so knowing Groton, Long Point, all that is really not, Mason's not right, all those areas that are now becoming very summer are not, or just weekend people are just not included in that.
Exactly. And so the way that a retailer would look at it, and we can touch on this later as well, is that you make the decision based on the smallest area and the smallest amount of people. That's how they're going to make the decision. Because what they have to do is be able to say, all right, well, I have at least this amount of people that will patronize my business over the next 12 months. And then if you have someone from the Hamptons that comes up here and makes a purchase, that's just the cherry on top. But that's extra. You don't build a restaurant, you don't build a grocery store on the basis that they might come here, and they might come here twice during the summer. You have to make it on the basis that these people shop here at least once a week. These people will buy groceries here. Anything else?
Can you just clarify for me what RTA stands for?
Retail trade area.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Yes. And in some markets, we sometimes define a secondary retail trade area, but what we felt here, because of the dense population and the much smaller confined geography that Groton is, that a lot of the consumers just exist in the primary retail trade area. And again, it kind of goes back to what you're saying. There are people outside of that area that make purchases here, that come here. But it's not enough for us to say that that's a reliable figure for a retailer to build off of. What we have to go off of is what they can depend on. They know, all right, as soon as the doors open in 12 months from that date, we're going to make this, because that's how they're wagering whether or not they could even like build the store in the first place. And so all of those numbers have to work out long before they put a brick or a shovel in the ground. So what I want to talk about now is kind of the other side, and it's a good segue because I want to talk to you a little bit about what retail site selectors do. When I started in this industry about 10 years ago, it was kind of almost like a very, I don't know, it's an industry that I would have never known even existed, that there were people that work for these companies that go all around the U.S. and decide, well, I want to put a store here. But believe it or not, that's exactly how it works. And they do a lot of homework, a lot of research. We help them with that. We send them our data. We send them our findings, because what we're effectively trying to do is make their lives a little bit easier. Make it easier for them to say, well, this looks like a good market. Because otherwise, they'd have to scour the U.S. And last I checked, I think there's about 36,000 incorporated places in the U.S. That's a lot of cities to go through. So we hope to make that part of their job a little bit easier. One thing to keep in mind about these retail site selectors, and they go by different titles: real estate managers, senior vice president of real estate. These are people that we deal with on a daily basis, but a lot of their job is not devoted to new store development, believe it or not. One of our employees we hired out of Kroger, the grocery store chain, she'd say if she were here today, she'd tell you about 5% of her day was spent on new store development. The other 95% was when someone backed into a pole that wasn't painted yellow, she had to get a property management group out there to repaint the pole and dealing with the hassles of property management. So really, they were more glorified property managers, which means for us, we have to be even more efficient with their time than we could ever be, just because we don't want to waste their time. If they've only got 5% of their day devoted to new store development, which is what the town of Groton cares about, then we have to make sure that we're not wasting that time. And so what we put together is some things that the town and people in the town and developers and property owners can all do to help speed up retail development. But first, even more importantly, let's figure out how to not waste their time and not slow down development. So one of the first things is not knowing the retailer site criteria. And so if you're a property owner, you're a developer or a landlord, knowing which retailers to go after and whether or not they would even entertain your space can speed up development. And can certainly slow it down when you don't know what that criteria is. If you don't know, for instance, AutoZone, we work really well with them. Ceiling height is a really big deal to them. They've got their racks. They're typically pretty tall racks, so they need at least 10 feet for the racks to clear, and that's not including something going on top of them. And so high ceilings is a big deal to them. But if you don't know that, you could easily waste AutoZone's time. Not knowing your site. This is a really interesting one because there's a lot of people that say, well, what do you mean, know my site? It's been in the family for 50 years. I think I know my site. Well, you know, what was happening in year 51 from, ago? Was it a gas station? Was it an old dry cleaners? These are important things to know, because if we get in there and we find out the retailer gets in there and finds out that there used to be a gas station there, or there used to be a dry cleaners there, that's going to definitely slow down development. I'm not saying it can't happen, but at the same time, knowing the history behind your site. We were working in Washington State, and they found remnants of a burrowing owl. And no one had mentioned this to me, but we had to wait for a year to make sure that the owl didn't come back. The owl did not come back, but it slowed down development and delayed us by a year because we were looking to make sure that the owl was not going to come back. No plan for necessary infrastructure. A lot of people, be it private parties or public sector people that we've dealt with, have said, well, we can get you that. I've heard towns all over the place say, well, yeah, we can get you this or we can get you that, and having no plan for how that's supposed to happen. Making sure that the monies are there for that improvement. This can even be a developer. We've heard of developers in the past saying, oh, well, I know there's asbestos in the building, but we can get that out. All right, well, have you checked? Have you gotten it quoted out? Do you know how much it's going to cost? Do you have the cash to be able to do that? Is it going to be ready in time? These are things that all play into the deal happening or not happening. So make sure that you have a plan for how you're going to remediate some of these issues that might come up. Complicated town zoning restrictions. This is a big one, especially as we work out west in California. They have overlay district on top of overlay district, and getting through all of that is a nightmare in and of itself. And then also trying to entice a business to come in with those restrictions in place is even harder. And so, at the end of the day, I do believe in having zoning and having restrictions where people can't just do this or do that, but not overly complicated. I think it all has to make sense, and especially makes sense for the businesses that you're trying to entice. If you can't do that, then obviously they might go somewhere else. Trying to advise the retail on the highest and best use of a site. We had a mayor once, and this is down south, but we had a mayor once. It was going to be an improvement of an existing property. There was a grocery store that wanted to put in a fuel station. And the mayor said, no, that's a Panera Bread site. I want Panera Bread there. And they had money in hand, ready to go, put in a fuel station. People could buy gas for cheap at this grocery store. And he's like, no, that's a Panera Bread site. Failing to realize no one's contacted Panera Bread, and no, it was not a Panera Bread site. To this day, that site still sits vacant. And Panera Bread's not there. The gas station's not there. Everyone lost in that. But he got in his head that, oh, my God, that is a Panera Bread site. And look where we are now. The empty site, no Panera Bread, no gas station. And so the retailers know best. There's a reason they spend millions of dollars on market data and research and tracking your credit cards and your cell phones, just like we do. But at the same time, that's not going to pass muster when you try to tell them, no, that's Panera Bread. I've told you twice now, I'm putting a Panera Bread there. This is a real life scenario. So this is a town that we've worked in before. I was not part of this deal. This was before me, but it may seem like, it was an out parcel restaurant. This is a Panda Express here. They put this Panda Express with a ride-in, ride-out with no way to access any back parts of this development here. Just a ride-in, ride-outs. There's a protected left you can make here, but there's no entrance or ingress or egress to the back side of this property. Just a ride-in, ride-out. This would work fine until you throw 36,000 cars on the street at lunchtime, and you work down here. So then to get in there and then back out and hopefully make it back to work in time before your boss starts coming to look for you, there's no way. Not to make a legal U-turn. And so what we find is that sometimes it's worth just paying whatever that developer back here wanted for the curb cut on the backside of that property. It will affect this person's business. That Panda Express, I'll go back so you can see it. This was taken at 11:30 a.m. Not the height of their lunch crowd, but there's like 3 cars in the parking lot. And so if people can't get into your place of business, that's an issue. So like I said earlier, not all doom and gloom. There are ways in which to speed up retail development. It's kind of the flip, the slow down part. Here's the things not to do. Here's the things to do. Know your demographics. Know who you're targeting. Know who's going to be shopping in your store. And if you're a property owner, don't be trying to recruit a tenant where you just don't have the market for it. Know who is in the market and who the consumers are, because that's what they care about. If no one shows up to shop at their place of business, it's going right back out of business. Having a plan for new development. It's great to be agreeable and say, well, we can do this, we can do that. But if you don't have a plan for how you're going to do that, then there's really nothing that you're doing to help them in that situation. You have to have a plan for how you're going to do the things that you're saying that you're going to do. Having the town being connected with its stakeholders. This is a really big one. At the end of the day, if you're a property owner in town, or if you're the town and have property owners, the two should know each other. It shouldn't be the first introduction for the town to meet the property owners and vice versa. Because I think by those two being connected, this process will be a lot easier and a lot faster. Without this, we end up spending half of our time tracking down these people and trying to find, all right, well, you know, does so-and-so still own this property? They don't own the property. Well, their kids own it. Well, they still own it, but they manage it. That information takes us a long time to research and get through. And so by having the town being connected with its stakeholders, we speed up that process drastically. Making sure that funds are available for infrastructure needs and anything else that a developer might need or a retailer might need. I don't think that would be an issue here, but what I'm saying is that, you know, it's great, you know, but if your site doesn't have sewer, we need to be working to figure out how to get them sewer. And we certainly don't need to go to them and say, oh, well, we'll get you sewer. You know, just come on, you know, sign the purchase agreement and we'll get you sewer. They're not going to do that. They've been down that road many times. They know better. They've gotten burned. They want to make sure that you have the funds and the plan in place before they sign that purchase agreement to make sure that they're not going to get burned after the fact. Overall, just making things easy. Like I said, if 95% of their day is property management, I've dealt in property management. It's awful. You know, it's a bunch of headaches. And so if we only get 5% of their day, let's make that 5% the easiest 5% that they've ever worked through. And that's something that we can also ask of you and ask of the town, is to make it easy on these retailers. Because if you can make it easy, they'll do it all day long. Their job is to build stores. And frankly, they don't care where they are. They don't care if they're in Groton. They don't care if they're in Alabama or California. They just have to build stores. So when their shareholders come back and say, all right, AutoZone, we want 180 stores this year. They don't care where those stores go. They just care that they are effective and that they're making them money. But if they spend 2 years because of an owl showing up on a property or because they found out there was gas tanks buried on it, then that's not making their life easy, and they're not going to come back for future business in that town. And so that you really get one chance to put that good taste in their mouth and say, all right, this is how easy we can make it, come back for more. And I promise you, we all talk. And this industry is probably one of the smallest knit industries I've ever been in. And I will say, like, the word gets around. We know towns that we've enjoyed working with, and we know towns that we would never work with again. So that's just something to keep in mind. The market demand really does drive how these retailers move. And so one of the questions that I get asked a lot, well, we've got yet another fast food restaurant coming into town, or we've got another auto parts store coming into town. Why have we got another one? Don't we have enough? Well, until you stop shopping at these auto parts stores or eating at these fast food restaurants, the market says, no, you don't. Because the market said, all right, we demand more. Because we keep spending dollars at these same places over and over. Dollar stores. We got people that love going to dollar stores. You might think, well, don't we have every dollar store? But at the same time, when you stop spending dollars at them, they'll stop coming. But as long as you keep like spending dollars at the dollar stores, they're going to keep building them because that's allowing them to make more money. Some parting words here. In essence, just be realistic with your goals. If you're a property owner, be realistic of what can come of that property. If it's 2 acres, Target doesn't want it. I'll go ahead and tell you that, you know. And if it's 22 acres, Popeyes doesn't want it, you know. And so just be realistic. Know what they're looking for. Know their criteria. And know what they will accept as a potential deal. But don't waste their time with something they wouldn't. Be logical. Again, like, they're not building a Saks Fifth Avenue in Groton. They're not. I can confirm that tonight. They're not building a Neiman Marcus here in Groton. But there's a lot of stores they could build. And so as long as you're realistic and you're logical about what can come here and who might be interested in Groton, you'll have a lot more success because of that. Be creative. We've seen it all. I mean, I really, like, working in 400 cities, there's been a little bit of everything. I've seen it each city. And there was one town, and I know this probably wouldn't fly up here, and I barely flew down there, but the town let the developer use the city's dump trucks to do some hauling away some fill. And I'm just sitting here thinking, well, I don't know if that was entirely legal, but that's creative. You got to give them that. That's at least creative. And so that's something that I always encourage towns to be, because it may be the difference of them doing the deal or not doing the deal. And it doesn't even have to be big things. Just little things to help out a developer, help out a retail tenant can go a long way with them. So as promised, we've got some time for Q&A. I want to make sure that we leave enough time for all the questions. So Any questions on any of that, be it the data or what retail site selectors do or what we do as a company? Right up here.
How much, just your last statements there, that was coming out to what we can do, how much of this is actually the property owners going after it, and how much of it is the town going after it?
It's all 50-50, man. And to be honest with you, because it takes both. I wish I could point the finger at the town and say, well, the town's not doing their job. I wish I could point the finger at the property owner and say, well, the property owner's not doing their job. It's really both doing their job. And that's where, you know, we all play a role in this. And it kind of goes back to the first thing I said when I first started off, was that for economic development, we specialize in retail, but housing's important. Industry's important. Healthcare is important. All of these things play into the greater economic development picture, and we serve one part of that, but it takes everybody doing their job in order to see success. And what you find is that when something shows up in your town, it didn't fall from the sky. I know sometimes it seems that way, like hey, they just showed up, but a lot of these deals, especially larger ones, take years. And so that's where, you know, I wish I could say it's one versus the other, but it really is everyone coming together. And that's where it goes back to the city or the town being connected with its stakeholders. If they don't have that relationship, whether it's a good one or not, if they don't have a relationship, it's going to be hard for a deal like that to come together, just because it takes both planning and zoning. It takes that property owner selling their property at the right price. It takes that retailer tenant to think, oh, well, we can make money here. If all those things aren't in line with one another, the deal will not happen. And so that's where it really, we really encourage this sense of community with the local development community, like having meetings and committees and things like that, where they can come together and say, all right, well, here's what we're looking to do. Well, here's what the town's looking to do. Well, here's what, you know, the retailer's looking to do, and really hashing out some of those conversations. Because I think when you leave people in the dark, you leave chance for error.
Have you actually developed a list of retailers that are interested in moving to Groton?
We
That you
have.
can share?
We try not to share that publicly until they're here, and so that's something that we use for internal use when we're contacting them and working with the town. But for public consumption, yeah, we typically target 25 to 30 retailers per city that we work in.
We're building 13 new retail spaces, and the town will have these names, and we can work with the town to try to at least contact these people?
Right, and what we end up doing is working with private property owners directly. And so then, you know, obviously the town's who pays us, and we want to serve them well, but at the same time, we can sometimes hold things in confidence that we wouldn't even share with the town, because our ultimate goal is to make sure that these retailers land here. So whatever needs to be done in order to make sure that happens, that's part of what we do for a living. And so if you got 13 spaces, I'm very interested.
Yeah, I've done a lot of retail site selection and hotel site selection, and one of the things I've noticed is in many places, you'll get a CVS and a Walgreens right across the street from each other. And in London, and you know, we've just had a CVS done here 10 years ago, and we never saw the Walgreens come in. And as far as in the, you know, fast food industry, I'm not sure, you know, what the demand is for additional fast food. I had an uncle that developed many McDonald's over the years.
Right.
And every time they went in, Burger King was within about 600 yards of them. Okay, so, you know, I understand that concept. Seems to me the thing we're missing is the gorilla in the room, and that is sort of the diminishment of in-person retail. I mean, I just did a zoning amendment in the next town over in Stonington,
Right.
where they had a very high percentage of, you know, properties, or of a property that had to be commercial, where there was no demand. You know, we made a very careful analysis of, okay, we need to have 50% of this building as retail, and the rest could be mixed-use housing.
Right.
We can't find any retail. And that project, you know, the project we did it for specifically, over the years, we had it approved for all office, which was not retail. There was some retail in it. So that's the question I have is, you know, we haven't really seen that here tonight, is, you know, what's the change in how retail is being done in the country, and how, you know, does that fit into the space we have available? Because there's a lot of available space in this town right now. People are trying to build more, and I'm just missing that, you know, part of the equation.
Well, so a lot has changed since COVID. We all know that. A lot of things outside of retail, but things that obviously affect retail and the retail market. One of the things that we've seen, for instance, with fast food businesses that are coming in, is they're reducing their footprint. And so then the model is, all right, well, we're going to all drive-through. I believe the conversion here for Dunkin' was to an all drive-through model. And so we're seeing a lot of that happen. What's interesting there, and this might affect some of the triple net leasing tenants in an inline strip, but for those QSRs that I'm talking about, they're still buying the same amount of land. They're just repurposing, what they're using and how they're using it. And so then instead of using this 1 acre parcel for a restaurant with a lobby and play place, if you're McDonald's or something like that, they're taking that entire 1 acre and trying to maximize how many cars can we fit in the drive-through. Chick-fil-A has been doing that for years, and every Chick-fil-A that I've seen that gets remodeled, it's literally a ground-up remodel. And the reason being is because what they're trying to do is structure, how do we get more cars in this drive-through? And so that's where, that's one example of how things are changing. Believe it or not, and this is something that's really interesting to me, and I think the Northeast was more affected by COVID and especially consumer spending. But across the board, if you look at the U.S. as a whole, we never really stopped spending. And so consumer spending is just going up and up and up. So the one thing that really we're trying to figure out is not how to do retail, but how to keep retail in person, like you're saying, how to keep it from being Amazon.com. And that part's difficult. It's very convenient to sit on your couch and order some shoes and order even a new TV, things that I would have never guessed that we could ship reliably. But now, the last TV I bought came in a box straight to my house.
It's like restaurants aren't really retail in the sense of the bricks and mortar store. And that's where we have a lot of vacant space.
We consider all of it retail. So the way that we look at retail is anything that uses commercial space. And so at the end of the day, we typically don't deal in the healthcare sector, but I've worked with dentist offices. We currently have an exclusive with an urgent care group. And so if they have commercial space or they're interested in commercial space, we consider that to be retail. So that would also include QSRs. Now, going back to what you're saying, talking about clothing stores and things that are not, perishable goods, soft goods as we would call them, those are still, they're trying to figure it out. And what we've learned is that there's certain parts of the consumer experience that just can't be replicated. And what they're trying to do is figure out, how do we manage the fact that we might lose or lower our volume, so our revenue might go down, but how do we keep consumers in this brick and mortar space? And the way that we do that now, or the way that they're attempting to do that now, is by the experience the consumer has. There's a reason that Starbucks is what it is, because when they started out, they weren't focused on coffee. They were focused on leather couches and a good place to sit with your laptop, and selling CDs and selling, mugs and all these other things that are not coffee. I noticed this morning, Caleb and I stopped by Starbucks on the way coming down here, and the sandwich that we got was more expensive than the coffee, which I'm sure it probably cost them more to make, but at the same time, they're selling $8, $9 sandwiches now. And so really focusing on what the consumers want and how to make that the best experience they could possibly have in that brick and mortar store. And I think that's the name of the game now. The experiential consumer is driving the market. And so I think there's certain things that by design are just never going to go away. The reason that you're getting auto parts stores is because the auto parts stores never even felt a hiccup. When COVID hit, their sales went up. And the reason being is because you're never, when you need brake pads, you're not thinking, well, I'll just get on Amazon. You're thinking, oh, I need to go get brake pads somewhere. So you drive by the same AutoZone 5,000 times in a year and don't even think about it. But then the moment that you need something, or a serpentine belt or something like that, you think, oh, well, there's an AutoZone right around the corner. There's an O'Reilly's right down there. And so then you just go back in your mind and you think, well, I'm going to go there and get it. I'm not going to order that online. And so there's certain sectors that will not be affected by that, and there's certain sectors that they're having to figure that out. And the way that they're having to figure that out is, what can online not do? And the experience is the answer to that.
Oh, hi, thank you. Listening to your presentation, I think it's great, but you focused a lot on like corporations, and what about the mom and pop who are local and they want to open a store here?
Right.
And they don't know to like maybe get the end retail location because that's prime for whatever you're selling, or they don't understand like you should have different, entrances and exits, something that's going to help make them successful. So how does mom and pop do this without all the research that the corporations have here in Groton?
To be honest, it's hard, and that's where it kind of goes back to the town being connected with its stakeholders. And so if you know that there's prospective mom and pop that's looking to expand here, that's where the town can be a help. So for the exception of some of the, like I said, the retailer match list that we produce, a lot of this is just public information. It's something that I know the town would be happy to share with some of these people. Now, one thing I will notice or point out is that with mom and pops, we try, and we do work with them, but we try to focus in on the ones that have done it already 2 and 3 times. One thing that we've always been hesitant to do is to try and make someone an entrepreneur overnight. Those may or may not work. At that point, you're kind of throwing the dice and saying, well, hopefully you'll be successful, versus if you already have 2 to 3 successful operations, usually number 4 is going to be pretty solid too, as long as it's a good site. And that's where, again, working with the town, I think, is a great solution to that. And that's where we can provide some of this information to them for free because the town has paid for it. And so that's something, I think it goes back to having that conversation with the town.
All right. And then also, you had mentioned that within retailers, word gets around about which towns not to work with. And so towns, they get a reputation. So how do you fix such a reputation?
It's difficult, especially once it's been tarnished. It's very, very hard to build a reputation, and it's very easy to tear one apart. As a business owner myself, I know that, and I know that that is always on the line for us, and something we try to keep in mind. And I think that towns are no exception to that. I think that what you have to focus on is, all right, how do we make this as easy as possible? Because effectively what you have someone saying, and I know this, again, I said earlier, they don't care which towns they're building in. They really don't. They care about which ones are the easiest. But they're saying, I'm going to invest this amount of money in your town. And so if you have someone lined up, someone that's willing to spend multiple millions of dollars in your town, do whatever it takes to make that process as easy as possible. Because just like they talk about the bad ones, they talk about the good ones. And there's a reason that some towns just seem to thrive and thrive and thrive. And a lot of it is planned out. But sometimes they've just done things the right way, and then that word has gotten around. Some of the trade shows that we go to, like the Vegas one that we go to once a year, this year they had about 25,000 people, which sounds like a lot of people. But when you're in this industry and you're immersed in it for, like I have been for 10 years, it's easy to know a lot of those people in that room. And it's easy to see someone that you recognize and find out that they're working in a town over and start talking about, what you're working on. And that's just very common for us to kind of share that, whether it's relevant to us or not, just kind of, share old stories. And so we've all got the towns that we would never work with again. We've also got towns that we know are great. And those are the ones that we recommend. Now, since we're paid by the towns, at the end of the day, we're in the business of continuing that. But at the same time, we hear it from the retailers that they've got towns that they just fell in love with. And we notice that those towns are very successful. But again, you can lose that overnight, with one bad dealing. And that's just really important to keep that in mind when making these decisions that you ultimately have to make.
Hi. About 10 years ago, I lived in a town called Madison, Mississippi. Do you know Madison?
I do know Madison.
Okay. And a few minutes ago, you were talking about more experience-based shopping. So in Madison, they built something called the Renaissance, and
that was my friend. That's who I mentioned this morning, actually.
Okay, so my question is, are you starting to see in the Northeast developments that are more curated, where the closest example I can think of is like an outlet mall, but it's a bit more curated because it's not outlet. There's a grocery store there and other boutique types of stores. So so rather than catering toward the Chick-fil-A who wants to maximize the number of cars, it's really curating a space that almost feels more European, where people can gather and there's more of a sense of place. Are you starting to see that in the Northeast?
I never thought I'd come to Connecticut and get that question about this particular property. So a friend of mine, one of my mentors in development, is Andrew Matisse. Andrew built the Renaissance that you're talking about. He's been a friend for many years, and the guy's just, everything he touches turns to gold. But as I've gotten to know him and worked with him, I find that it's not luck. I used to think, like, man, some of these guys just get lucky. Andrew is not one of those guys. Everything that I've said tonight kind of goes back to what he lives by. And he understands better than anyone, in my opinion, that you have to make it easy for them. And so I could bring him, and we've worked together on multiple cities that he has properties in or that he wants to develop in. But if I bring him something and he knows it's not going to be easy, that's lower on his list of priority. And so what he has created with the Renaissance is truly amazing, especially for Mississippi. And I can speak to this very specifically because I grew up there. A lot of those retailers in that center never even thought the state was for them. Not just this property, not just this town, but the entire state. They said, well, Mississippi is not where our consumer is. And it took him a long time to convince them of that. But he didn't do it with just one retailer, and he didn't do it with just two. It took him bringing all of that to come together at once to build that center. And now it is the bee's knees. It is like the experience that consumers want, and they patronize it as much as humanly possible. But it took a lot going into that to get them all on the same page. And he's the type that would tell you that it took the city, and it took the town working with them, and it took the property owners that he bought that land from, and it took the retailers accepting that maybe this is a market for us. And so I wish I could point to there just being one thing that creates something like that, but I really think it's his diligence of just being dedicated to seeing that to fruition. And so it's something that constantly amazes me. For him, working with other towns where there's not as many opportunities, he's still the type of person that would want to pursue, make sure every, stone's, unturned, not left unturned. But at the same time, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and the ones that are the easiest are the ones that he would pursue first. And that's the same way for the retailers. They don't want to make their own life hard. But it was a struggle to convince them that was a market for them. I think that there's some very interesting things that are happening here, especially when I'm in Mystic. I think Mystic is a really great example of that same experience. And again, I'm not comparing Mystic to this shopping mall in Mississippi, but at the same time, it's the experience that he's selling there. It's not necessarily a shopping mall he's selling. It's the fact of how you feel there. He opened an AMC theater at the backside of that right before COVID. I don't even know if it was fully open before COVID hit, but he hired the guy that created the fountains or did the fountain design at the Bellagio in Vegas to do the fountains in front of this movie theater. I can't imagine what that dude spent on those fountains, but at the same time, people come just to see the fountains. And so none of that has anything to do with retail, but you have to get people there, you have to get them engaged, and you have to give them something that they can't get on Amazon. And that day in Madison, Mississippi, it's fountains, And so I can't tell you exactly what to do and how to create Mystic in downtown Groton, but at the same time, there's a lot of things that go into it that aren't necessarily just a retailer signing a lease or a retailer signing a purchase agreement. There's other things that go into it, and that's what I'm talking about is that experience. I think that's a huge part of it, especially in the post-Amazon world that we're living in.
I'm going to ask a question. I'm trying not to rant here. So I've been with the town for 7 years, and I've heard a lot of stories. I've heard from many people in town about their own experiences, like when the cinema closed down at the Big Y Plaza, people talk about, geez, I had my first date there. So you talk about experiential and the linkage to retail. It's not just transactional, it's someone's experience. Personally, I grew up outside of north of Boston, and as a boy, I remember my parents driving me around as a kid, and I saw this development, namely on Route 1. It was horrendous. Well, fast forward, I ended up study environmental planning, land use planning, probably because of what I saw and I didn't like. And now focusing more exclusively on economic development. Where I'm coming around on this is I think everyone has biases and opinions, and you referenced early about the need to make a process easy. In Groton, from my perspective, there is a challenge and striking a balance between the economic development and the planning regulatory framework. And I think sometimes there's a fear that if you make it too easy, that's analogous to relaxing your community standards. And I don't think that's what you're saying. And I want to see if you could touch on the importance of elevating community standards, how that fits with building community, and ultimately attracting a strong market.
So I think what that boils down, there is definitely ways in which to do that, and it's not necessarily an easy thing to keep the standards high, relax regulation, and relax your restrictions that you might impose. But there's ways in which to do it. And I can't speak to anything specific at the moment just because I don't know what all the restrictions are at this point. But I will say they're willing to budge. It's just how much they're willing to budge. And I know it's the same for the town. Everything is a negotiation in what we do. There's give and take and there's compromise. But that is what ultimately leads you to a deal being done. It's what I find is that when I can speak about it on the other end, when there's not enough community standard and regulation and restrictions, that's not good either, because then they're looking at a town they frankly don't want to locate in. There's too much risk for crime. There's too much risk for infrastructure problems, or the consumer public not showing up, to make purchases. So there's a balance between those two. And how to strike that balance, I think, largely depends on what the retailers need and what the town is willing to do or not willing to do. And I have to see both sides. It's very difficult because at the end of the day, I get it. We don't want to lower our standards, and I don't think you necessarily have to. But you also can't say, well, you can't do this, this, and this, and this, and especially if it's on a Tuesday, but you can do it if it's on a Thursday. We've seen it all, and that's where the retailers will throw their hands up and say we'll just go somewhere else. And so that's where it's not necessarily playing poker, but at the same time, if they fold and move on to the next town, then you're the one that's lost here. And so I think there's a way in which to have both. Another question we get asked a lot is we don't want to look like a big town with a bunch of big boxes in it. We like the mom and pops. Well, you can have both too. Because right now, our data shows you're going and shopping there. Whether you want it here or not, you're spending a lot of dollars over there, $600 million. And so with that, you can have both. And that's where you get into things like zoning and districts and things like that. But you don't necessarily have to say, well, we are anti-big box or we're anti-mom and pop. We only want big boxes. I think there's a way in which to have both. But I think that's up to the town council and the community to ultimately decide this is what we want to see. Because at the end of the day, the market's going to demand it, and you're going to go somewhere and buy these same goods and services one way or another. It's just whether or not you do it here. Because we can see that you're going somewhere and getting them. But I don't guess you have to do it in Groton. Our goal is to change that where you do get them in Groton. You get everything that you need right here without having to go somewhere else to get it.
I'm moving my way back there, but I just want to circle back. So as we drove around today, Casey's been here all day. He pointed out we didn't just look at properties where we could do some infill, but he would comment hey, look at the situation over here. This isn't that attractive. And it was a visual blight type issue. He said, when retailers come to Groton, it's just not about the deal. They want to know about the community. And that really kind of struck me that we have a high quality of life in Groton, but he's focusing on an issue that I wouldn't normally have thought of, that a potential investor who drives into town might be looking at. So I guess the point I want to make is that the quality of life, the things that we do across the board impact our economy, and vice versa. The perception that we put out there to attract our investors impacts whether or not they come here. So it's a two-way street.
I guess my question is, we talked a lot about how businesses look at the data about consumers in this area and they decide that we're not going to build a Trader Joe's here because it's not the right market, or we're But that's the only option. Like, how are you supposed to go anywhere else if this is the only option within 15 minutes of your house?
What's really interesting is consumers get what they want. And I think I made this comment earlier today, is that the customer really is always right. The customer will get what the customer wants. And again, it just boils down to how far you've got to drive to get it. And so when they see that consumers are going out of the way to find these goods and services that they want, they see that as an opportunity. But a lot of people, a lot of humans take the path of least resistance. And if we know, all right, well, we can put this here today and make $2 million, let's do it. Let's open it this afternoon. And that's where, again, it's driven by consumer demand, and they know that it is a safe bet to put a Popeyes here. It would be a riskier endeavor, just to quote your example, with a Trader Joe's. There's a lot of reasons for that, and it's not. I'm not saying that the market's not here. In fact, I believe that it might be. However, it's riskier. And so I've traveled all over the U.S. teaching classes on incentives for retail. And so by each state, it varies based on what they're able to do by state statute, how to incentivize retailers. But one of the first things that I start off with in that presentation is talking about the conservation of energy. And so it can't be created, can't be destroyed. The same is, it's the same thing for risk. Same is true for risk. It's inherent in whatever you're doing. And some things are just inherently risky. So the only thing you can really do at that point is shift it off from one party to another. And so sometimes that's shifting it off of the developer onto the town, or shifting it off the retailer onto the developer, or the developer onto the town. At the end of the day, things are just risky. I don't mind telling you, Trader Joe's here would be riskier than a Popeyes. That's just, the market says that it is. And the fact of the matter is we know that there are people here right now that would eat at a Popeyes. We don't necessarily know that there's enough people to pay off the investment that something like Trader Joe's would cost. And so that's where it's not a no, or it's not an end of the line scenario, but it's harder and it's riskier. And so that requires us to convince someone to take a bigger risk, or to shift some of that risk off of either the retailer back onto the developer, or the developer back onto the town, or what other vehicles we have. Y'all are familiar with TIFs here. I know that that's allowed in Connecticut. That's a very good vehicle to have for shifting some of that risk off of a developer onto the town, or at least give them something that they can take to the table and say, well, it's not as risky as it would have been without this. The test that we use for TIFs is the but-for test. And so the test for that is that it could only be used if not but for the use of this incentive for this development to happen. And so that means that if we did not use this, the development wouldn't happen, so it passes the test if that's the case. It really just goes back to risk management and how tolerant they are to building in what we call marginal markets. This is not a marginal market for every retailer, but for some retailers it is. And so that's where sometimes we can sweeten the deal by having, for instance, a shopping center that has multiple retailers. They might not necessarily make the profits they need to see in one tenant, but the next tenant in the box over makes them all the money they need to see. And so then they can basically accept a loss on this tenant, but this tenant's making all their money. And so it really boils down to the specific scenario and where they're locating. But if a retailer's not coming, it's because they've said we can't do this in the costly fashion that we need to. And so you have to whittle away at that. It's a big accounting problem. If you can put some numbers in there that make sense, they'll do it all day long. But if the numbers at any point don't make sense, they don't build it.
So then there are certain things in our community that people are very outspoken, people in our community, about what they would like to see or what they don't want to see. And they, for example, there are luxury condos. And they're very outspoken, like, we don't need luxury condos, or nobody's going to buy those, or who's going to live there? Nobody wants that stuff in our community. And then somebody builds luxury condos, and they're listed for like $650,000, and they're basically all sold before he even opens the building, and people are like shocked by it. And then but you have this big outcrying of people in the community who have their mind made up of what they think our community is without actually having the conversation. So then you're fighting, like, not fighting, but you're having this giant information that's not even accurate out there, and you're combating this. And like, I don't know exactly, like, instead of having the full conversation, people want to shut down the conversation of having certain types of thing come into our community.
Right.
Before it's even gotten here and the full conversation had. So like, how do you combat that? There are plenty of people or businesses or developers that want to come here, but they're having an outlash from the community that thinks they understand maybe demographics or what the community needs are without actually knowing what our community wants.
Well, that's why, again, like, it's preaching to the choir, I feel like. But number 5 here, the reason that that's on there is because we encounter it so often. Everyone thinks that they know more than the retailer. And that's fact. I deal with it every single day. I deal with developers that think they know more than the retailers. I deal with property owners that think they know more than the developer that knows more than the retailer. And so it's just this vicious cycle where everyone thinks that they do the retailer's job better than the retailer. But I can assure you that there's a reason these are multi-billion-dollar companies, and they're spending millions upon millions of dollars on research. And so I think it's because so much of it happens in a silo. Like, the way that the retailers work is very mysteriously, and we've had the opportunity to work with them long enough now where we kind of know their inner workings. And I've done work for some of these retailers that I've mentioned today. But so much of what they do, you're never exposed to. And the developers are never exposed to. They might not even, so one of the agreements that we just signed is for an urgent care group. And so they've got a number of clinics, and what they're looking for us to do is to do the site selection exclusively for this brand, for their new clinics. And so then what I've got to do is decide, all right, what makes your current clinic so successful? And then also, what about that can I look for in a prospective community or with a prospective site? And so then as we're becoming the site selector, I have to look at this data and I have to do all the research. And not every property owner is going to have the ability to do that. But I can assure you, if they're to the extent of like a Trader Joe's or a Kroger or AutoZone, they're spending millions of dollars trying to make these decisions and make them accurately. I think at the end of the day, you just got to trust that these retailers and developers know what they're doing. And not all do. And some of the developers that we work with, a little questionable at times. But at the same time, the market will decide that. And again, I go back to the point I made earlier, the customer truly is always right. And what happens is when the customer's right and the developer's wrong, they go out of business. But you guys will all make that decision when you ultimately either decide to shop there or not shop there, or buy the $600,000 condo or not buy the $600,000 condo. It sounds like it worked out for that developer because they're already, there's a wait list. But at the same time, that's not always the case. And there's a lot of information that goes into that. I wish I could just point to something and say, well, this makes or breaks a deal, but there's just so many parts. We're working on a performer right now for a grocery store, a prospective grocery store on behalf of a developer. And my staff can tell you, we don't leave any part out, because as soon as I leave something out or I forget something or omit something, there's going to be an issue. And it might not be enough to shut down the project or make it so that they're not profitable. But at the same time, that's not going to be good for the retailer. And they're the ones that are ultimately going to experience that, because as soon as they open the doors, they're going to find out whether or not what we said was true or not. And so we had if anything, when we quote numbers, we're always on the underside of what they truly are. We had a project we were working on with a developer. It was about an $18 million shopping center. The city was on the hook for $5 million of that. They issued bonds for $5 million. This is in Alabama. They just make up laws down there and do whatever they want. So basically, they wrote $5 million of bonds and handed over to the developer, and that was the developer's out strategy. It all worked out, so they never have to use their out strategy, but it was risky for the city too. But we quoted their trade area as being 119,000 people. After they opened it, ended up being 130,000 people. So I would much rather be on that side of it than I would be, it should be about 130,000 people, and they open it up and they're missing, 10,000 people. And so that's where we really have to be careful, and the retailers have to be careful when they're exploring these opportunities, because they don't want to be wrong. When they're wrong, it costs millions. And so that's where, for someone in the town saying, well, no, we don't think people would buy this. well, have you spent millions on research yet? Or have you even tried yet? And that's where it sounds like that developer, for the condos knew a little bit more than whoever said they shouldn't do that. I wish I was that developer in that situation. I was selling $600,000 condos left and right. So
If I could just piggyback on that, I do think government is often challenged in recognizing market. Often there's a desire to create a regulation that sets the stage for almost anything. But, there's so many examples if you think on your own regarding the successes over the past several decades, whether it's McDonald's with Ray Kroc, even Amazon. Think back, how about cell phones? People are thinking that's just insanity. Well, how many times have we thought of an idea that's coming to market and they knock it out of the park? And it's going to continue to happen. And I think that reinforces your point. We have to trust the market to a certain degree. Our regulations should protect the community from a minimum standard that here's a bar you have to meet, but not necessarily control every facet of the market. The market has to have some flexibility to move forward. I know Sam's got a question.
Thanks. I just wanted to talk about how it sounds to me like when they look at the retail trade area, those psychographics and the nature of it, that's a snapshot, and that can change over time. Can you just briefly describe how that might evolve in migration, out-migration, natural demographic shifts, or maybe income changes, and how that might change the perception of those site selectors?
Absolutely. So consumers change. And I think if there's one thing I would like for you to leave with today, it's the fact that you all decide all of this. I don't make any of it. The numbers are just the numbers. We don't have like a big machine in our office that just makes up numbers. The consumer demand drives all the expansion and everything that the retailers do. If you stop doing it, they're going to stop doing it. I mean, they're either going to stop doing it or they're going to go out of business. And we see, how Sears looks right now and how JCPenney's looks right now. They got it right at one point, but they didn't get it right in the past 10 years. And so that's where that's left them. In terms of how consumers change over time, trends change all the time. Our industry is the most dynamic I think I've ever experienced, just because it's probably changed since I started speaking tonight in some form or fashion. I'll probably go check my email later and there'll be a news article about something I didn't know was the case. That's just how fast it changes and evolves. But that's not because of the industry and what it is. It's because the consumers change. As you have an aging population that decides one day to retire, they might not stay here. And if they do stay here, they might not like a microbrewery, or they might not like a Trader Joe's. They may be fine with Big Y, they may be fine with Aldi, And if that's the case, then, and if they stay here and no one new comes in, that's fine. The issue with that is as you have people come back or people come here for work, they have different demands. And as they have different demands, someone somewhere is going to say, all right, we need to capitalize on this opportunity. Everybody in our industry, I will vouch for this, everyone in our industry is in the business of making money. If they see an opportunity to make money, they can and they will every single time. It depends on like where, what you're presenting to them. It's a marketing issue is really what it is. If you're marketing the community as, all right, well, it's an aging population, they're all retirees, they don't want Trader Joe's, they don't want microbreweries, they don't want anything experiential, and Groton will probably look the same in 10 years. But if you've got consumers here that are my age or that are younger, starting their families, there's going to be more demand for single-family housing or multifamily housing, or there's going to be more demands for microbreweries and a cinema or a place to go bowling. It's to spend the evenings after you get off work to enjoy all the money that you've made that day. I will say, I'll speak for my generation and say that we like doing things. We're not good at saving. Well, all we're good at doing is spending. And so we're the best consumer these retailers have ever had. But at the same time, if we can't get what we want here, we're going to go somewhere else and get it. That's just the fact of it. And so that means that what we have to capitalize on here is trying to keep some of those people here and those dollars ultimately here so that they're not leaving and going somewhere else. I've got friends that they'll They don't even have the means, but they'll go on trips and they'll go to concerts and they'll work an extra shift just so they can pay for concert tickets this week. That's their prerogative. You know, at the end of the day, I wouldn't do that. But at the same time, if they choose to do that, there's a consumer. And so the retailers don't dictate that. The consumers dictate that. They're just following the consumers. And so I guarantee you, our data says that you have some of these consumers here. You just don't have the offerings that they're looking for. So that $600 million I showed you earlier is them going and finding those offerings somewhere else.
I think it might be combining a few things that people just said to get to one thing you've got here is the data being fairly static, and so you sort of addressed, okay, if the demographic changes to some degree. So what can we do to make some changes? Do you have any if-then scenarios that can be built into the data, such as if in the middle of Groton there were actually another 400 housing units, okay, serving younger professionals, and that might make a Trader Joe's in front of it possible. So what kind of if-thens could happen that are physical?
The if-thens for these scenarios, especially like the ones that we've talked about tonight, if you bring in more people, especially young people, they're going to demand these goods and services. They already are, but as they're continuing to come in and as multifamily is going up and more housing development is happening, it's just going to continue. That will be seen by someone at some point in time. Whether or not it's the ones that you want here or the developers that you want to be working with or the retailers that you want to be working with, someone at some point will see that opportunity, and part of our job is to market that. So if, you know, under normal circumstances, they would have seen it in 2 years, getting them to see it tomorrow. And so that's a lot of what we do, is marketing that back to the retailers and developers that need to see it. I think going back to your if-then, what y'all have done really well with, I think Mystic is truly something special. And I thought that the first time I came here, I thought that today when I was there, and I will continue to think that just because I love it there. I mean, the last time I was in town, this was in May of last year, I made a visit here, and I spent so much time in Mystic and loved every minute of it. I think what you have to look at there is how do we take what we've done right and do it somewhere else? That's what the retailers are doing. It's no different for them. If you're AutoZone or if you're McDonald's or you're Walmart, you're saying, all right, these stores, and the same for me working with the urgent care group that we're working with. What have you done that's worked? And how do we take that and do it again? And just keep doing it again and keep doing it again. So I think the focus needs to be on what is currently working for Groton. And I'll tell you right now, Mystic is absolutely working for you. Even if only half of it's in the town, it's still serving Groton. It's getting people here, getting people to the area that would have never come, you know, ordinarily. But now it's like, oh my God, we can come up from the Hamptons. If you're getting people from the Hamptons and Mystic, you've done something right. I've been to the Hamptons, very nice, but Mystic is pretty cool. But you just got to figure out how to do that again. So I would say in your if-then analogy, if you build another Mystic in downtown Groton or in the city of Groton, then you're going to have the same success. You're going to have people coming from the Hamptons and going there, and you're going to have people spending dollars and not going to the tune of $600 million somewhere else. But just the staff at the town alone and just our company by itself can't do that. There's so many things that have to come together, and that's things that we don't necessarily control. You can write policy and you can do zoning and restrictions and all that, but at the end of the day, someone in the private sector has got to say, well, we got to build this thing. We got to put this deal together. And if that never happens, then obviously you're never going to see it. But if we start here tonight and we say, all right, well, we've done really well with Mystic, and there's a lot of other parts in town that are either blighted or they're underserved or they're not being used to their highest and best use, then how do we take what we already know we can do and just transfer it to the other side of town? And work with this developer to get the job done, work with these retailers to get them there, work with the town to make sure that it's not substandard or below what the town expects in terms of restrictions. But there's not just one part of it that you can do and expect it to come. You have to work on all of it at the same time. And that's daunting. I do it all day long, and it's a task. But if you start whittling away at the process, I promise you, you will see the same results because you've already proven that it is possible. You can drive 10 minutes down to Mystic and find out it's definitely possible. It's just how do we do it again?
We're going to wind down in a couple minutes, but we have another question here.
Okay, I'll try to leave on a more positive note. One of the things you described when you're driving around town today, which is something that I live sort of on the more mystic side of town, is, it's the demographics and the people that are here. Socioeconomics of the, base, the majority of the people in the town of Groton who love a Popeyes. The last 3 months, I've talked to at least 6 people who say, why don't we have a Trader Joe's? And these people that have lived in the area a long time ago, for a long time. Early in my career, we tried to get a Benihana on the top of the Guard Theater. And we had all the guys, those markets, retail selection guys. We had them right there. And you know what they said? Boy, this would really, really work. Because our catchment area for that, type of facility is basically from Old Black Point to Watch Hill. But that's only a summer seasonal group, and there's some of that going on in the Groton Long Point, area also. What I see though is with the influx, and I think you started to say it, is if we get a lot of these young professionals, then it's democracy will work together with demand, and we'll see, enough bodies. And right now, I think we're starting to see that with the opportunities we're having with Electric Boat expanding and other people moving to the area. A lot of the people that are moving to the area that are buying the condominiums that you described before are people I know the developer very well, and that did sell out. They're coming from, Fairfield County and, the New York area and saying, well, we are retiring now, and we want the brew pub, even though we're 62 years old. We want the Trader Joe's, there's no question. But if you look at the majority of the population, because I had a retail client for many years who, the median family income was $48,000, and I did a lot of site searching for him, and if it wasn't on an interstate highway where you could see a lot of people, in buildings around there that didn't have cars in many cases, it wasn't going to happen. And I had, I thought I had some really great sites and I was going to get a finder's fee. Didn't. But I mean, I think the growth we're seeing and the opportunity and the demand and the, how democracy works. If you get a majority of the people or a large enough base of people around here, we might see a Trader Joe's. When I was a kid, to go shopping, we had to go to West Hartford or the Warwick Mall, to give you a sense.
Well, and nothing about any of this is impossible. If you told me right now, I got 12 people that will spend $1 million a piece at Trader Joe's, they'd build it tomorrow. But there again, that's not realistic to think that, oh, well, if we could just convince people to spend $1 million a year on groceries, we'd be good. The seasonal, I'm glad you brought up the seasonal aspect, because that's another big one. And we got asked one time, a town that had a community college in it, and they were asking, well, is that a big deal or not? And I kind of alluded to this earlier. It's not that they would overlook that, but they can't make a decision on that because it is a seasonal crowd. They're basing their decision on what they know to be true for 12 months out of the year. So then they're throwing the seasonal people on top of that. But that's like the cherry on top. That's extra. They're making their decision on whether or not to locate on who's here in January. And so if you don't have enough people in January or February, it's never going to happen. And so that's where it's tough to make that decision, because in some markets that we worked in, they would have enough people in 3 months out of the year to patronize a whole store and keep it open for 12 months. The problem with that is that very same scenario that I just described was fine up until COVID. After COVID, no more. It was a college town, it was a university that had about 40,000 students. And as soon as they removed the 40,000 students during COVID, it went down the drain. And so some will take that risk. Again, none of this is impossible. I've seen crazy things happen, but at the same time, you have to convince them it's worth the risk. And sometimes they're going to say, no, it's not worth the risk. And keep in mind, for these site selectors, they're still not the boss. So what happens with these site selectors? They're real estate managers. They work for these companies. And I have to deal with them and talk to them, and Paige has to talk to them. But at the end of the day, they have to turn back around and go before their real estate committee, usually 3 to 5 people, to vote on whether or not they should do this. And if they vote no, then it's not going to happen either. And so the job of the real estate manager or the site selector is to go and get as much information from me and as much data and as much basis for whether or not they can make money there, so that they have ammunition when they go back before their real estate committee. Because if they walk in that room and they don't have a compelling reason as to why Groton is the next store that they need to build, they're going to get laughed out of the room. And so it's not the end-all be-all for the people that we are even talking to, because then you got 3 to 5 people that still have to say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, or no, that sounds like a terrible idea, and you're fired. And so that really is like the dynamic, of the people that we deal with. But it's not just so much to say, oh, Groton's a great town, the Mystic's really cool, and they can add that into their pitch, and we will certainly add that into our pitch. But at the same time, they're not going to make the decision on whether or not to build their next store on that basis alone, just because Mystic's cool.
I think we're going to try to wrap it up, and some great information tonight. My big takeaway, beyond the obvious, is Groton has great assets, but we have challenges as well. And it's a full picture, kind of like a puzzle. We focus a lot on certain components, open space. Others, maybe we need a little bit more focus on. It's the full picture when the site selector's making that pitch and they talk about, hey, do you know about all these jobs that are in Groton? That's not enough. Jobs are not enough. How's the housing? We spoke with some employers today. We need to do a better job in the housing. Open space, doing great. Education, definitely stepping up our game. Maybe public transit, maybe we need to focus on that a little bit. We had a comment today from an employer. Okay, you do this housing, we have the jobs. How are you going to get our people to work given fuel costs and maybe transportation? It's a full picture, and it does come together, and I think that's what we're after. And I think, Casey, what you've provided today is definitely some great information. Obviously, NaviRetail works for Groton. I would encourage you, if you have comments, questions, send them our way, whether it's me, Sam, Kevin, anyone, and we'll relay it on. And as I said before, Casey's traveling the country. He's immersed himself in Groton. He understands how great it is here, but also our challenges, and he wants to paint that picture so we can attract investors to get the companies that we desire at the end. So give us your feedback if you have something after tonight, your questions. I'll get you responses. I'll get you information. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you all for
Thank
having
you.
me.